Hey guys, welcome to Warhammer Stuff. So today we have 2,000 points of Imperial Knights House Hawkshroud versus the White Scars. So let's go ahead and check out the armies.
Alright, so for today I am bringing 2,000 points or 1,996 points of White Scars, and they're all firstborn. Now, in this case, I have 1 battalion and 2 CP. So first starting off, I have my Khan on bike, which he just has his Chigoran Storm Warlord trait, Hunter's Instincts, and he has Chapter Master rerolls. And then he has... Oh, I also, for some reason, the Battle Scribe wouldn't let me to give it to him, but he has the relic Wrath of the Heavens, which is basically a bike that can ignore everything moving forward, terrain, models, and stuff, and has 16-inch movement. And then I have the Librarian, which he has Lightning Call and Ride the Winds. Apart from that, he has nothing special. I mean, he's Chief Librarian, so he has the extra psychic ability. Then for troops, I have 3 units of tactical squads. The only thing special they have is they have 1 grav cannon in each, just so they can contribute. Then in fast attack, I have 2 units of bikes. They're fully loaded, or maximum number. They have all Astartes chainswords, and the sergeants have thunderhammers. Alright, and then I have a unit of attack bikes, and they each have a multi-melta. And then onto heavy support. Now, I cannot find the model for grav cannons, but I have a whole unit of grav cannon devastators, and they have the Signum and the Harmonium Cherub. So, yeah. And then I have 1 unit of multi-meltas, and they have 2 extra marines in them, which have just regular bolters as fodder, just in case. And then I have 4 units have rhinos. Each of the devastators have a rhino, and 2 of the tactical squads have a rhino. And that is 2,000 points of White Scars.
Alright you guys, so for 2,000 points on the dot of Knight or House Hawkshroud, I have 3 Armiger Warglaves. They have just the regular loadout. I have 2 squads of 2 Armiger Helverins. Now one of them doesn't have melted guns, they just have the Iron Hail Heavy Stubbers. Because I had quite a big chunk of points, but obviously Knights are not cheap, so I had to downgrade a bunch of stuff to get 1 more Warglaive. So even my big Knights don't have extra items or anything like that. But so that's it for my smaller Armigers. 1 squad has melted guns, 1 does not, and then the Warglaives have their usual. So then I have my Knight Preceptor. Now he has quite a few things, because they're really the only people you can give stuff to. So he has the Relic of the Banner of Macarius, which gives me basically an additional honor point, and he has objectives secured. He has the Warlord trait Revered Knight, so if he's in engagement range, he has always fight first, and an additional honor point. So he gives me 2 honor points. He also is part of the Exalted Court, which is the Master of Justice, which allows him to have another martial tradition, which he has Paragons of Honor, which gives me a 3rd oath for my army, which is pretty cool. And then he has, as far as his 3 knightly teachings, the Folly of Mercy, the Virtue of Courage, and the Wisdom of Nobility, which are all pretty cool. And so he has a lot of buffs. And then moving on to my Warlord, which is my Knight Paladin. Now he also has some stuff. He is also Exalted Court, but he is a High Monarch, which does a couple of things. Being a High Monarch means that he has to be my Warlord, but every time I gain an honor point on a 5-up, I gain an additional one. And when he uses his noble or his bondsman ability, all armigers within 6 inches of him get it instead of just 1, which is pretty cool. He also has 2 Warlord traits, which is Ion Bulwark and Blessed by the Sacrosanct. So Ion Bulwark is a 4-up invuln against ranged attacks, and Blessed by the Sacrosanct, unmodified wound rolls of 6 with ranged attacks inflicts 1 more wound on the target in addition to the normal damage. to a max of 6 mortal wounds per unit per phase. And then his bondsman ability, basically I select an armature and they get to reroll a hit roll and wound rolls of 1, which is pretty cool. And so he has a heavy stabber. He doesn't have a melted gun or anything or any additional weapons. And that is 2,000 points. My big concern with this is that I don't have like heavy damage on my big knights. They're really just buffing the armatures, and I don't know how well that'll play out for me. So we'll see how we go playing an armature heavy list.
All right. So for today's mission, we have Data Scry Salvage, which is Control 1, Control 2, Control 2, Control 3, Control More, as well as the objective, or the secondary objective for the map is if you you must do an action on your home objective, and at the end of your turn, when it's completed, you will gain points equivalent to how many objectives you have in the middle of the board, up to 3. And then after that, the other thing is that all objectives, if you take them over with someone who has objectives secured, you can leave the objective and they will still be yours until your opponent takes them away or takes the objective. And that is the mission. Alright, so for secondaries, what we're going to do is for the White Scars, we're going to have first engage in all fronts, which seems obvious for something like them. Then we have bring it down to counter his vehicles. And then we have Oaths of Moment, which is basically me just destroying vehicles, getting in the center, getting his face, and not running away. So pretty much they all complement what I am going to be doing in the battlefield.
Trying to be doing, you should say. So for me, 9th edition books usually have a lot of secondaries, so Imperial Knights have 4 secondaries. So I went with 3 of them. The first one is Yield No Ground. So basically I get a victory point to a max of 3 if I control half or more of the total number of objective markers on the battlefield. No enemy units are wholly within my deployment zone, and no Imperial Knights units from my army ended their turn closer to my battlefield edge, so moved backwards essentially. Oh, and none of them fell back, which is in the same one. And then I have Honor of the House, which at the end of the battle round, if I have 6 honor points or if I have more than I started with, I gain 2 victory points by default, and then 3 additional if I'm virtuous, and 2 additional, in addition at the end of the battle. Victory points for my army is honored, and then if I'm dishonored by the end of it, I lose 3, which is not great. But anyway. And then renew the oaths, which essentially I have to do this. It's an action in the middle of the battlefield. And I get 3 victory points if it was a non-Titanic model, 4 victory points if it was a Titanic model, and then an additional point if it was a character model. And then on a 4-up, I gain an honor point when I complete it. And so those are my secondaries.
All right. So for deployment, White Scars ended up going Defender, so they were the first one to deploy. So I placed my Khan on bike because of his bike basically ignores all terrain and everything. There was no reason not to put him like behind the cover and stuff there because he basically can ignore it for movement. After that, it was more of, because I know he has really high firepower, I was really careful. Like I put something where if he on his first turn got it moved and did stuff, I'd have very little that could be hurt, or in some cases he'd only have 1 range of firepower that could really hit me. And so I put my guys primed in all the locations they could go to reach and touch the objectives, to move out and spread out from there. So it's really like top left heavy for my map, but because they're high mobility they can go a lot of places. But I chose a lot of places for my rhinos and bikes to go where they would be very safe, so if I got wasn't first turn, it'd be very unlikely he would do any damage to me really without overextending himself and priming himself for getting charged. And that was essentially the idea behind my entire deployment.
Yes, so for me, I really had 2 main focal points. One was keeping units around my paladin because of his being a high monarch. Whenever he uses his bondsman ability, it hits everything within 6 inches and once per turn he can make that bondsman ability permanent on an armiger. So I want to really kind of focus in on that aspect of it, but obviously I can't just abandon half the map. So I had 2 armiger, the warglaves, backed up by the knight preceptor, and the preceptor, because he has his chaplain things, his knightly teachings. I wanted him to also be somewhat near the middle, so that way he would still be able to affect a nice range, because all of their stuff is about 12 inches, those bubbles. So he's hitting almost all of, or able to affect almost all of the armigers currently. And that was really what it was. Yeah, I need one armiger to stay in the back, but I also kind of kept my units a little farther back in case he does get the first turn, because he's White Scars and he can move quite quickly. I kind of kept them back just in case, so that way they don't just all die, which would be so depressing. But that was it. It's really just buff zones that I was trying to keep them within, but my army is just a whole bunch of the same thing, so there's not a lot of relevance in where they go.
All right, so who goes first? Well, I mean, based off what I said from my deployment, if I go first, I will rapidly rush and take as many objectives as I can and be behind cover, but do my best to position myself in such a way that you're going to have to extend yourself in to get line of sight for shooting and such. So I'm going to be doing my best to try to stay to hide as much as I can, and you're going to have to overstretch to get me. And my rhinos are surprisingly tough, and so I don't think they're going to immediately just fall over and die. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah, some things have happened, but we would see what happens. If I go second, I've defended myself pretty well. I'm fairly confident that you would have to really extend out to get any kind of shooting on me, and in which case it's very bad shooting, so you won't really have that much to go on. And then after that, and then I would just try to clobber you on my turn if I could. I have some buffs for a lot of movement and stuff, but we'll see what happens. So that's what would happen if I went first or second.
Yeah, so I think for me, going first is the least interesting of the 2 options. I think going second would be better because you come out, and so it literally just allows me to come out guns blazing and just, hopefully killing things. We'll see. Now, if I go first, the challenge is different. How do I move forward and yet not set myself up to die the very next turn? Because I don't have a lot of models. So that is the challenge. I think because, especially since these blue things are so big, I actually believe that my knights can actually hide behind them. I don't know about the white walls. They still kind of look like they would cover almost all of it, but there's still some of it poking out, so it probably doesn't count for the big 2. So that's kind of, yeah. So I think if I went first, it would be a little more movement. Yeah, I would take some objectives, but I think it would be more, how do I move forward without setting myself up to die on the next turn? So I would rather go second because I can just respond more, and it also makes some of my secondaries and oaths easier to pull off going second than it does first.
Yeah. And then let's see who goes first then.
Yeah.
It always freezes right there.
I got a 4.
I got a 2. You're first. Alright then. Imperial Knights turn 1.
Alright, you guys. So for my command phase, my Knight Paladin did his Bondsman ability, and it didn't really matter which one I put it on because it affects all of them within 6 inches. And so he hit both of the squads of Warglaive, or Helverins, and then the one Warglaive that was near him. And then he made the one with the 5-prong marker light. He made that ability permanent for him. And then my Knight Preceptor, on the one Helverin that has the marker light on it, gave him exploding 6s to hit. And the Warglaive next to him, the ability to... What's the word? Do a objective, an action, and still be able to shoot and charge and stuff. But I gave it to the wrong one because he ended up not doing it. And then that was it for the command phase. So movement, everything kind of spread out. So the green squad of Helverins moved up towards that top objective, and that was pretty easy. Now they're a squad, but they actually, once they're sorted, they don't actually have to stay together. I'm just currently moving them conveniently together. And then the Knight Paladin kind of crept up behind them just to kind of still be pretty far back, but be able to see and do stuff hopefully the next turn. And then the one red Helverin stayed on the home objective because I need someone there. And he started the mission secondary. And then the other one moved up to take this objective here on the bottom right, I guess, for you guys. And then my two Warglaives, I actually think I messed up their movement, but one moved close enough to actually be able to do my Imperial Knight secondary, renew the oaths, and then the bottom one kind of crept along the bottom wall. I'm hoping he's staying far enough away that he's out of reach, but we will see what happens there. And then the Knight Preceptor just kind of waddled forward. And that was it. Alright, you guys, so for shooting, it was relatively... it was okay. So my Armiger Warglaive, all the way at the top, that's scooting along the bottom, shot at the Rhino, doing 4 damage. So he had his Thermal Spear, 1 went through, and it did 4 damage. So that was nice. Didn't quite bracket it, but then my Knight Preceptor shot and did 2 whole damage. So he bracketed it. And then my green squad of Armiger Helverins shot at it, so 1 shot at a time, because they're separate. And they actually destroyed the Rhino. It didn't explode, but obviously when it gets destroyed, he had to roll. He lost 1 of his Devastator Marines. And then the other Armiger shot and killed 1 of his Devastator Marines as well. So he lost 2 Marines there, and a Rhino. So that was actually, that was good. But that was also all of my shooting because nothing else can really see anything. So, yeah, and that was my shooting phase. Alright, you guys, so for a point, I actually did okay in secondaries. So I did the Data Scry Salvage, so I got 2 points for having 2 objectives. And because it's an objective secured, it's done at the end of... I think it's finished at the end of my turn. I think that was part of it. Yield no ground. So I was able to get all 3 of those because it's done at the end of my turn, and I went first. So there's no competition for any of it. And then Honor of the House is done at the end of the battle round, but I'll probably get 2 points for that. So that's pretty cool. And then Renew the Oaths, I got 3 points for my Armiger doing it. If I had a one of my Titanic units, so one of the big boys doing it, I would have gotten 5. But, you know, whatever. And then I gained 1 honor point because of Renew the Oaths. Or no, because of Renew the... Yeah. Which now, because I'm Hawk Shroud, I count as 1 additional one. So I'm actually... virtuous instead of just honored, which is pretty cool. And that was my points for this round.
Alright then, so for movement phase, well, first the command phase, the Chapter Master Khan gave the red squad of bikes Chapter Master rerolls. After that happened, then basically everyone ran to objectives. Rhinos ran to theirs, Green Rhino ran to one, was a little short. The bikes, red bikes ran forward, failed their roll, so I had them re-roll it. All the Rhinos moved up. The purple Devastator Marines ran. The attack bikes moved forward. They didn't run. The green bikes ran to get, I guess, to a better spot. It's just like they'll be out in the open, so I'll have to wait a bit. And the yellow squad of Space Marines moved onto the objective, where they'll now be doing their the objective mission thing that they have to do. And Yeah, and also the Conan bike rolled a 4 for his run, and because he has that special bike that basically can go through everything, all-terrain and models, he was able to just park all the way over there in a strategic spot, risking everything, so we'll see what happens. Alright, so for the Psychic phase, the Librarian with a jetpack, I forgot to mention that, tried to buff the Red Squad with Ride the Winds, basically adds 2 to their advance and charge rolls. He needed a 6, he rolled a 5. I spent a CP to roll that and I rolled him one at a time. He rolled a 5. Then I used his other spell, which was Lightning Call, which selects the closest enemy unit within 18 inches of him. It does not specify that I need line of sight, it just has to be the closest. And so I chose the Armiger, that's the closest enemy, and basically they take a D3 mortal wounds. He took 2. But if the unit does not die, I roll another D6. On a 4-up, takes a mortal wound. If that fails, on a 5-up, he takes another mortal wound. And if that goes through, on a 6-up, he takes another mortal wound. And so he ended up taking 2 more mortal wounds for a total of 4. And that was the Psychic phase. Alright, really tough game. So my attack bikes fired their multi-meltas into the Armiger up top, and they just did terrible. Barely did anything, and they only did like 3 damage to it because they rolled so poorly on their damage set because he saved a bunch. Then I had my Devastators fire, so because they ran, I spent a CP for stratagem that turns their heavy weapons into assault weapons. I can't remember what it's called. Hunter's Fusillade. And basically, they fired, barely did any damage, but because the Devastator Marine, like the Signum and the Armoring Cherub, so basically I had one Marine fire twice at Ballistic Skill 2, and he was able to bring it down to 3 wounds left. So it is very weakened, but it's still alive. And then that was pretty much all my shooting, except the Rhino, the Blue Rhino, fired his Hunter Killer at it, and it failed. And that was my shooting phase. Alright, so I had one charge. I had the Red Squad who had to charge the Armiger Warglaive. They needed a, essentially, what was it? They need to make a 8 or something. They rolled a 9. They just barely made it in. And yeah, and then it's been a long time trying to think where the con would go. But I was thinking of what would happen afterwards. And so I decided that there's no point in charging him currently. And so I stopped there, but we stopped the recording beforehand, but my opponent had heroically intervened with the other Armiger Warglaive that was to the side. And that was the charge phase. Alright, well, a slap fight. So basically, I swing entirely on the Armiger Warglaive with all my chain swords. And so they have 21 attacks, the Chapter Master rerolls, and they end up doing 4 wounds to him. Then the Sergeant with the Thunder Hammer swings, does 2 hits, and fails to wound, rolls 1s and 2s. Then he swings with the might of his entire army. Now, even though I did bracket him, his house treats it as if he has double the wounds for bracketing. So essentially, I didn't bracket him. And so they swung combined with their sweep attacks for many attacks, and somewhat whiffed it, but still was a lot. Did like 12 wounds on me at AP -3. And because of Armor Contempt, thankfully, I did not take as many. And so I lost 2 guys, and one guy took 2 wounds. So that really was not as big as I thought it would be. And that was the turn. Alright, so for missions, Datacry Salvage. I did get that. I did get 2 points for there. And so I did get engaged in all fronts for 2 quarters. I did not get Bring It Down, sadly. I'm getting there. O's the Moment. No one retreated, and I have a core unit, the Bikers, within 6 inches of the center. And that is the points. It was a really disappointing turn. Like, nothing died. And that was my turn.
Alright, you guys, so, before I forget, I just want to let you guys know I have 3 oaths, which is Protect Those in Need, Defend the Realm, and Refuse No Challenge. And so, right now, I'm at max honor points, so I am virtuous, which means that I am just ridiculously buffed, I guess, is the way to phrase that. And so, what that means is that in the command phase, my Knight Preceptor gave my Armiger Warglaive, at the one that's at full health, his sorry, give me 1 second. it was the exploding sixes. And then he gave the Folly of Mercy to the armager on my home base, which is so that way he can shoot and still do an objective because I don't have spare models. And then my Knight Paladin gave his bondsman ability to one of the red armager Helverin, and then it by default also hit the back, or the one closest to him, with his 6-inch bubble. And then I made the one permanent on the red armager Helverin, that way I can slowly knock them out. And that was my command phase. So then in the movement phase, what had happened was, since in no man's land, if you have objective secured, you don't have to sit on an objective to hold it, which is great because my entire army is actually objective secured now. The only reason why my back armager is on there is for the mission secondary at this point. And so my armager all the way at the top moved. Because I'm House Hawkshroud, they count as double their HP or their wounds for their stats. So he's technically in the middle bracket, even though he only has 3 wounds left. And so he moved forward 10 inches, sitting onto the objective, and then the Knight Preceptor also moved forward his 10 inches. And then the 2 Warglaves in the middle stayed because what else are they going to do? Also, I would lose an honor point if they fell back, so I'm not about that life. And then my 3 armager Helverins on the bottom side of the map basically all scooted forward, as did my Knight Paladin. So they're all just kind of creeping up the board here, trying to slowly shoot them down before they fight me in combat. Although, based off of what happened in the middle, I don't know if I should even be afraid of that. But that was my movement phase. Alright, you guys, so for the shooting phase, I basically started from the top and worked my way down. The armager Warglaive all the way at the top shot at his attack bikes with his essentially 3 meltas, and actually did nothing. So that was useless. And then the Knight Preceptor shot, he split fire, so his melta gun shot at the purple Devastators, which I believe missed, because there's still 5 there. And then his, what was it, Laz Impulsor shot, and 2 went through, and he needed 6s, and he rolled 2 6s, because that would have wiped out 2 bikes. So that was just the worst. But anyway, and then moving on, the 2 armagers, the Warglaives in combat, shot at the Space Marine bikers. I think I only killed 1 off, or was it 3? What did I end up? No, it was 1, I think. Because of just the shooting heavy guns into combat as vehicles, and whatever. And then my red armager Helverin on my home objective shot at his Rhino, and he was actually able to do 6 damage because their autocannons are flat 3 damage, which I never realized, but it's actually really good. But I guess everyone else probably knew that. And then a couple of things happened. So my green armager Helverin, the one with the 1 marker light on it, shot at the Rhino here, and it brought it down. It didn't quite kill it. Or did it? No. Because he also has a melta gun, which shot, and it... anyway, so he brought the Rhino down, and then the other green one finished it off. And then the red armager Helverin shot at his blue Rhino, and did... did like 3 damage to it. So I think only 1 of his went through. But his other gun, he shot at the green squad, killing 1 of the Marines off. And then my Knight Paladin shot, finishing off the Rhino. That first green armager Helverin, I'm sorry guys, shot at the green bikers and killed 3 of them. There we go. Then the other green armager Helverin destroyed that Rhino. Then the red one destroyed, or brought down the other Rhino. And then the Paladin finished it off. Okay, there you go. That is what happened, you guys. And that was the shooting phase. Alright, you guys, so for the charge phase, my Warglaive all the way at the top charged his attack bikes. He didn't overwatch because, in my experience, and I think in his as well, outside of the Tau, it's generally a waste. But he got in because I have +1 to charge. He needed a 5. I rolled a 6, so he got a 7. He got into the side, and then my Knight Preceptor charged his purple Devastators. And he needed a 9, but so in reality with the +1 he needed an 8. But I rolled a 9 anyway, so he got a 10 on his charge. And so he was able to just fit nice and snug in there. And that was the charge phase. I thought about charging one of the Helverins into like his little green squad here just to kind of take them off, but I realized that it only has 4 attacks and nothing with any kind of AP. Doesn't even have food as a weapon, so I was like, that's just going to end up in another tar pit, so I did not want that. And so those are the only 2 charges. Alright, you guys, so because he couldn't interrupt, I basically started with my charge. Well, I mean, you have to anyway. So I started with my Warglaive. And so basically 2 of his attacks went through. He failed the saves. I used the heavy, the strike attack, which is 3 damage flat. And so 2 attacks went through, and he failed both of them. I killed 1 bike because they're 4 wounds. And then that was it. And then my Preceptor swung 9 wounds, went through. I think he saved 2 of them. But 7 at the sweep thing was 2 damage, so it wiped the 5-man Devastator squad, and he didn't consolidate. And then he came in and swung with his bikers, which actually were able to kill off my Warglaive. So that was a win. It was really the Sergeant with the Thunderhammer that did him in. I failed both of the saves, so if I had failed 1, he would have lived, or passed 1. He needed a 5, I think. So I command pointed it, didn't work. He died. Didn't explode. And then my Armiger Warglaive swung back the other one. Now I used pack tactics at the beginning because there were 2 there, so it gave him an extra attack. So he had 5 attacks, and then 3 went through, and he didn't save them because he needed 6s, and because it's flat 3, it just took a 3 out straight up. And then he swung back with his blue attack bikes on my Warglaive, and wasn't able to do any damage there because he needed 6s to wound. And that was the fight phase. Alright, you guys, so for points, at the beginning of the round, I held 3 objectives, so, you know. And then Data Scry Salvage, so I did that one, and because at the end of my turn, I had 3 objectives, I was able to get the full 3 for that. And then Yield No Ground, I got the full 3 points there, because I have half or more of the objective markers, no one's in my deployment zone or wholly in, and no one fell back or was closer to my side of the thing. And then Honor of the House, I got 2 points at the end of his turn last time, just because it's at the end of the battle round, and I ended with more victory points, and just like that, at the end of his turn, I'll probably get 2 points for this as well. And then Renew the Oaths, I actually didn't manage to do the objective, because it's in the middle and those guys are tied up, so I got 0 points there. So I'm doing okay on points right now, and we'll see if he's able to make a comeback out of it. Yeah.
Alright, so first, command phase. The Khan gives the red squad chapter master rerolls. After that, it gets pretty iffy. So the red rhino disgorges their troops onto the objective, move around to get line of sight for shooting. After that, then the red squad in the middle falls back from the Armiger Warglaive. The blue squad of attack bikes falls back from the Armiger Warglaive on the right or left. The Space Marines roll forward. I missed this, but apparently my bikes auto run 6, so that would have been useful to know earlier. So they moved up. Chapter Master auto run 6, so he actually has a 22-inch move because of his relic bike. So he moved down south to be able to intercept wherever. Yellow squad moved to be out of the range or line of sight of enemies, and and they started doing their secondary objective. And that is all my movement. Alright, so my librarian cast Lightning Call, and he failed it. He needed a 7. I re-rolled it. He failed it by 1 point again. He does not get +1. So then I cast Smite on the Armiger Warglaive, and he killed it. Alright then. Alright, so for the shooting phase, Rhino up top fires Hunter Killer Missile at the Knight Preceptor and did absolutely nothing. Or he did 1 wound. It got through and did 1 wound. The Red Space Marine Squad mag dumped him and did absolutely nothing. The attack bikes, they spent 1 CP to allow them to fire after falling back. They did absolutely nothing. And the Librarian... I'll skip that. Then the Blues Devastator squads in the middle fired at the Armiger in the middle, and they actually did a couple wounds. They did 4 wounds to it. Something. Then the Green squad fired in him as well and did absolutely nothing. And that was the shooting phase. Alright, so for the charge phase, the Red squad in the middle charged. They rolled a 3 at -2 to move through this terrain. They failed it. And then the Green squad charged, the 2 Armigers in front, made it in, the Khan charged, made it in. And that was the charge phase. And he also heroically intervened with his other Armiger in order to maintain the point. Alright, so for the fight phase, the Khan on bike swings. He has Chikoran Storm, which gives him a D3 attack, so he has 4 attacks base, 5 on the, for the first round of combat, plus D3, which ended up being 8 attacks. And so he hits on 2s, 1 miss, and then he has +1 to wound against vehicles or monsters. So he did like 6 wounds. My opponent saved 1, and because also the first turn in his charge, he's treated as like a power fist, and so he's hitting at strength 8. And so when it rolled to damage, my opponent's guys apparently have -1 damage, and because of that, he survived. And so it brought him down to like 6 wounds. Then after that, my Space Marines on bikes swung with their chainswords, did 2 wounds, and the Sergeant with Thunderhammer swung, and he didn't wound anything. He got 2 hits in and then whiffed his wounds, double 1s. And then he swung back, he did 2 wounds on my Khan, and then he did 1 wound to my squad of bikers, and that was the fight phase. Alright, so for points, I control 2, so I get 1 objective for main. Data Scry Salvage, I only had 1 objective at the end of my turn because all the bikes and stuff are not OBSEC, and my 2 guys there are OBSEC, but his guys are treated as, because it was high virtue, his 2 Armigers that are on there are treated as OBSEC 8 models each, so he has 16 on the point. I couldn't do anything about that. And so I got 3 points for engaged on fronts because my Khan is definitely within their 3rd quarter. I got bring it down 2 more points because I killed one of those. Oaths of Moment, I killed one of his guys. I have the center of the map. Actually, I killed 2 of his guys this whole battle round, so that's why I'm up to 5. And it is not looking good at all. Alright, so we decided to call it there, as simply because the war of attrition was going so horribly against the White Scars and such constant failures on their end where they weren't able to really do the damage. It's like just horrible rolls and stuff, and so it pretty much was over at that point. It would just be being slaughtered to the rest, and there was nothing else that could be done. So MVP, LVP. So LVP is Meltas in general. That Armiger at the top left took 8 Meltas to the face. On this.
To the face.
Yes, and it didn't die. The absolute worst rolls possible. Every time I fired the Meltas, they so heavily underperformed. Statistically average. They weren't even average. They were below average. I fired so many Melta guns, and they consistently failed, whiffed, their damage rolls. I mean, that Armiger up top did take like 6 wounds through, and when it came to rolling damage, it was all 1s, basically. Absolutely terrible. And the closest second of
that was crummy.
Yeah, a close second of an LVP was the Sergeants. These guys both did the exact same thing with their Thunderhammers. They rolled up, missed every single one of their swings in the first round of combat. They were right there poised to finish off the enemy, and they whiffed hard. So LVP, basically the bikes in general, especially the Thunderhammer Sergeants, and the Meltas, they so underperform so poorly. If they just performed statistically average, I would still be in this game. It would be somewhat in my favor. Basically, one side of the battlefield would have been mine for sure. The other side would have been a fight, and it would be collapsing and going into like an actual close game. But they performed so statistically below average, absolute trash. An MVP. So Interestingly, these guys did the exact same amount of effects. They each did around 6 wounds in total. The Khan had 1 turn in combat, and he did 6 wounds. He would have pretty much nearly killed off one of the Armigers if it wasn't for his -1 damage. The Librarian did a bunch of mortal wounds, which was really helpful. However, he failed really important rolls for buffs and stuff early on, and it cost me a lot of command points to get these warp powers off. So these guys are terrible, but the true MVP is the Rhinos. Absolutely.
Stupid Rhinos.
Yes, MVP. Absolute MVPs right here. These guys took so many shots and protected their cargo so well from melta guns, from all that heavy artillery. They protected their core. 70 points. How much did I spend on these guys? They were each 90 points because they had a Hunter Killer Missile for hoping to do a Hail Mary, and 2 Storm Bolters, so they were heavy loaded up to actually do something in the game. But these guys were really good. They were the best thing. They did their job perfectly. They transported all my heavy guys, my infantry, safely to where they needed to go. No one did their job better than the Rhinos. They got their targets there, or they took so many hits that they protected their targets. My multi-melta squad would have been wiped out before it ever got to shoot if it wasn't for this. So MVP are these Rhinos. Rhinos for the win. Yeah, the only one who did their job.
Rhinos took way too many wounds.
Yeah. All right, yours.
Well, my MVP was my Warlord, my Knight Paladin. His ability for like that, just him being the I forget what it's called, the High Monarch, like that upgrade where his bondsman ability for reroll and wound ones for wound and hit rolls, and it being a radius of 6 inches was ridiculous. And so his those constant rerolls was actually really good. And even though he actually shooting wise didn't do like a lot, I think he downed 1 Rhino maybe. And so, but he didn't do a lot, but I think his constant buffs was actually a huge deal. He also with his the same ability got me up to 5 virtue points within the first turn, which is crazy. And then, so I think he did really well as like a buff. I was actually worried because I didn't have any, like a lot of like heavy damage. So some of the knights have like heavy damage, whether melee or shooting, but I didn't really have any. So I was actually really worried that I wasn't going to be able to do enough damage with the few models that I had, but it didn't seem to feel that way in actual gameplay. Plus I never actually got into combat with him with his giant axe or chainsword. And then my LVP would be the Knight Preceptor, and not because he was bad. He did a lot. He was actually on the front of line the whole time. It's just I never really used him to his fullness, and that's my fault though. Just because I didn't quite think through how I was going to play with him. And so a lot of his things were based off a 12-inch bubble to be near the other big knight. So they were supposed to kind of stay close together, and then they were going to do like chain buffs onto all the different armigers and stuff. But that, that plan kind of fell apart. So his abilities were essentially useless. So I could have probably gotten something that did more damage. Or, maybe he was okay enough. I don't know. But again, nothing really did poorly in my army. I think everything did really. That armiger that survived like way too many meltas, like that was impressive. The other one that he really just rode out like multiple rounds of combat against those bikes, like that was impressive. Which, by the way, I was looking at as you're moving them, the bike sergeant they were in combat with, his Thunderhammer is mastercrafted.
Yeah.
Which meant it was a 4 damage Thunderhammer. But anyway, so he didn't do badly, my Knight Preceptor, but I didn't use him to the fullest of his stuff, so that's why he's the LVP. So, how did it feel playing White Scars for the first time?
They feel like garbage. Okay, look, I performed statistically under their abilities. They, on paper, because clearly on dice they didn't do anything, but on paper they're incredibly dangerous. Because, so I didn't get to perform it because you targeted them, but with a rhino and with... So I can basically have my guys disgorge out of a rhino after the rhino has moved, and they can move and shoot. They can't charge, but they can move and shoot. That's 1 CP. So my Melta unit could move 12 inches in a rhino, 3 inches after getting out, then move 6 inches, and they could also run, potentially, and spend 1 more CP to have their weapons be treated as assault. And so I could basically go from complete safe cover to on the other side of the map and do a bunch of multi-melta shots into the most important space, or take an objective and just melta something to death. They have a lot of ridiculous power. Now, while I would use that for shooting and stuff, like, because a lot of their buffs really do help shooting, so like the rhinos can really move their heavy weapons around, and they can really be highly mobile weapon platforms, essentially moving their multi-meltas around across the map. So what is that? That's 12, that's 15, then that turns to 21 inches to move. You can run it, so it can be from 22 to what was like 27 inches of running with them, spend 2 CP in total to get them out of the vehicle, and be able to turn their heavy weapons to assault. So move 27 inches and then fire multi-meltas. That's a big deal, but that's unfortunately disappointing that they weren't able to really follow up. The bikes, being able to advance 6 inches automatically and charge is a big deal. So I can basically strike from anywhere very easily. So I can basically take the board. You're not really that safe from melee and from really strong shooting of heavy weapons. But they just didn't perform. So, I mean, bikes with chain swords, like, they're strong-ish, but that's against hordes. So maybe against a less armored, a less tougher foe, it would have been different. But even still, just things didn't work out well. Khan on bike was pretty good. Like, he could be anywhere. He could go exactly where he needed to be, but it just wasn't enough. He just wasn't able to really cut it. It's just sad. Maybe it could have played, maybe got him in on the first turn charge, and maybe just tried to help him to kill out that first group of armigers in the center faster, but who knows. I wasn't expecting to be wiped out so quickly, or like I expected to be able to kill more of your guys, so it's like, on paper, they're pretty cool, but I wasn't able to really get it to work. They're highly mobile, very dangerous. They have a lot of special buffs that others don't have with their mobility, but it didn't take them across the finish line. Maybe if they actually performed average, it would have been different. If those melta shots would have worked, I would have been able to sweep the rest of the board because of my massive mobility, and I'd be basically pushing you back. But that didn't happen. So that was my thoughts. What about yours?
Well, so this time, I played Knights a couple of times a while ago now. But so this time I really wanted to kind of build a list that really kind of fed off itself. So my Knight Preceptor, between him and my Knight Paladin, just with their abilities and stuff. So the Revered Knight, and I think one of his other abilities, his relic. So his Warlord trait and his relic gave me +2 virtue or honor points right at the beginning. And then House Hawkshroud counts as 1 additional one. And then every time I gain 1 because of my Knight Paladin, so his, what's it called? High Monarch upgrade gave me, so within my first turn, I was already at Virtue 5, or Honor 5, which is Virtuous, which is the highest tier. And then my Preceptor gave me an additional, Oath, because he was able to take another like trait thing, and so I had 3 oaths, and then I had all the layers of those buffs, which was a big deal. And so I think this army actually fed off itself really well. I didn't play it quite right, but that's because, you know, it's, I don't know, with so few units, like I think you just have to play them a bunch of times to kind of get used to that. But I also probably would have Knight Paladin. I think is important just because of his bondsman ability. But I might have swapped the Preceptor out for maybe something with more shooting damage, and maybe one less Warglaive. So like swapped a Warglaive out for like a Dominus class, like the big boy with the shooting. But I actually really liked the list. I was worried again because they basically only had one actual like damage gun each, and then just their chain swords. Despite the fact that the Preceptor has a power fist thingy there. And so I was worried I actually wasn't going to be able to do enough damage because I know the White Scars are mobile. I know that like if they get in combat with me, like I'm stuck. Especially since one of my oaths was that I can't fall back. So as good as the oaths are and they give you a bunch of benefits, at the same time they trap you. So like anytime you got into charging distance, or got into combat with one of my guys, anyone nearby had to jump in on the fight. And so that's why like when you charge the two Helverins up top, I was like, I don't want to heroically intervene the third guy in, but I have to. And so that's an interesting aspect to the army. But I like this list. I think it fed off well. Plus the 2 command points per thing was ridiculous. I've never had a surplus of points like that before. Usually by turn 3 or 2 even, I'm out of points and I'm just like, okay, well, I don't know what to do now. But I actually had quite an abundance, and so that was pretty cool. I actually almost took a relic or a warlord trait that on a 5-up would give me an additional point. But I was like, well, how often am I going to roll a 5-up, you know? So I liked it. I think House Hawkshroud is actually pretty cool, because it also that count as double wounds was a big deal, and they have a stratagem which is a d6 plus 6 heroic intervention, inches wise. So they could really just like scoot their way in real hard, and so I liked it. I think it was fun. I like the Imperial. I've always liked the Imperial Knights. The last 2 times I played it, I did not do quite as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like them. I think there's a lot to learn with the army. I think because they have so few data sheets, it seems like a simple army, but it is not.
Yeah, it's an abundance of rules.
Yeah, because there was like between the 3 oaths, the allegiance, so Quaestor Imperialis, the house itself, and then the Exalted Court upgrades, the relics, the bondsman abilities, the warlord traits. Like there was actually a lot I was keeping track of, or trying to at least, with these guys, plus the -1 damage for things under a bondsman ability. So it was, yeah, they seem simple, but they're really, really not. But they're so much fun. So I enjoyed it.
All right then. Well, GG's. So like the video if you like the video, share it if you want to share it, comment if you want to comment, and more to come. Bye.